Welcome to Regulated Roots, the series that takes you behind the scenes of the cannabis industry's most influential brands and talented minds behind them. I am your host, Kimberly Simms, and today I am giddy, girl crush giddy, thrilled to be here with my friend and colleague, and truly one of the smartest women I know, Pamela Epstein. Pam is the Chief Legal and Regulatory Officer of Terpene Belt Farms, and she has been a longtime lover and advocate of the plant. In today's episode, we're going to shine a spotlight of hemp, and I truly cannot think of a more passionate or knowledgeable person than Pam. So, we're nearing the end of the year here, and I feel like we're at this pivotal crossroads here where we want to bring together all the things that are part of the cannabis CBL plant and regulate cannabinoids in a much more comprehensive manner than we have been doing. So today we're going to talk about all of it. We're going to mention it all: terpenes, cannabinoids, regulations. We're going to see if Pamela thinks we can ever reach parity between hemp and marijuana, and we're just going to have a good time. So as I was getting ready for our interview or our chat, I was thinking back to the first time that you and I met. And please tell me if I'm wrong, but I think that it was when we met in Santa Rosa, 2016. Pam and I were on a panel together, and we hadn't met prior to that. So I think maybe we spoke on the phone to prepare for it, like once maybe, or maybe not even. And if my memory serves, the panel was about like local land use and the state's dual licensing process. We were maybe under the first set of medical only emergency regs. And the attorneys in the cannabis space, I think, are always so collegiate, and I think by and large we all really do get along. But every once in a while, you just kind of click with someone, and I was like, I gotta be friends with this girl. Like, she's so smart. She's so passionate. She's so intense. And I think like the truest way to crystallize what I think of you and my admiration of you is cannabis had been consumed and it had been consumed, and we were sitting and eating at like the Amy's drive-through in Santa Ana, and we were talking about all of these regulations, and you were just talking so fast, and you had such a depth of knowledge, and it was like layer after layer, and I'm like, I'm trying to eat my macaroni and cheese. I'm trying to focus on like what you guys are talking about to like suck up all the knowledge, and you're back and forth, and I'm like taking notes on my phone because I want to remember everything that we're talking about. And for me, it's been love ever since, and I'm so excited to be here today. And 2016 was a minute ago. We've seen some shit. We've seen some things.
Right?
Yeah. So Pammy, what have you been up to since 2016?
What have I been up to? It seems so long ago and like a blink of an eye, right?
Yes.
I remember from that time that you had written out notes for the presentation, and so did I. And I was like, oh, girl after my own heart. People that come in without notes, I'm like, how do you do that?
No, even if I never look at them, I still feel a security that they are there.
Right. It's like my security blanket.
Yeah.
But it's been a long educational road since 2016. At that time, I had Greenwise Consulting. And from there, I got to really specialize in with one client, and that was Eden Enterprises. And they did cannabis work. And through that company, we really took the opportunity in 2018, we started to like look at the farm bill. And then 2019, when there was more availability for hemp, we got one of the first hemp registrations in the state, because it was really difficult to grow weed where we had our farm, because we wanted a structured greenhouse. Nothing was like traditional ag, right? It goes back to what you said, parity. We are in California an ag product in the field, in the ground, and hemp is an ag crop. And that's such a huge difference, like that one little thing. And so we kind of looked towards how to best utilize and embrace, to another one of our former board members, Sabrina Noah, to embrace the pivot, the power of the pivot. And we sort of pivoted and found this unique opportunity within terpenes. And so over time, those companies kind of evolved separately. And then we had Terpene Belt, and I was more invested in that side. And that's how we got into hemp. But even though we're in hemp for the cultivation of terpenes, sourcing of terpenes, which are a non-cannabinoid input, but that are used in cannabis products, specifically vaporized products, primary product, so that we can restore the flavor and aroma of the cannabis plant. And it is probably one of the great pleasures of my life to be able to stand in a 300-acre, 266 irrigated acres of hemp just growing for the sky, right? It smells like weed. It is what agriculture is, and it's where we want to see that industry grow. For me at this juncture, like, where is the world? We're a little bit like Thomas Jefferson, right? Join or die. That's when you said, how do you get to parity? It's unite, regulate, or die for me for the cannabinoid industry. But we'll probably talk all about why I feel that way throughout. But that's kind of the long and the short of what I've been up to.
And I think it should be mentioned that you did so much work when you were president of California Cannabis Industry Association on this issue. And, you know, it's not like such a novel conversation anymore. I feel like back a few years ago, if someone were like, what do you do? Oh, I'm in cannabis. It was like everybody wanted to, to talk about it. But hemp is sort of a divisive conversation within our industry. And you have been just such a champion for trying to bring that parity and unite the industry. And I really think probably one of the loudest advocates for it, certainly in the state of California. And we are all grateful for that work, to stand to bask in your sunlight.
Oh, I appreciate that. I mean, we are all the cannabinoid industry, right? At the end of the day, whether you're hemp or cannabis, you're selling a product that has cannabinoids in it. And if we want to see the positive proliferation, if we want to see descheduling, right? Like true descheduling, we need to do it together, because in my opinion, you cannot reschedule that which you have descheduled. And as we get into why that is the case with the Farm Bill, that's really where we're at. So, I think anybody who's in the cannabinoid industry today that's a responsible actor wants to see scale. They want to get to these consumers. And look, I don't want one consumer to have a bad cannabinoid experience. And I think that exists on both sides of that, difference without a distinction, cannabis sativa L coin. Good operators want to see good proliferation. We shouldn't be so scared that we're going to annihilate each other. That market is huge, and consumers want these products. That's like the lightning rod to get us together. I get that knee-jerk reaction. Nobody wants to be treated like a cannabis business. You know this for your clients. It's overwrought regulation.
So it's intense. It's intense and it's difficult. Like, on the count of three, let's say, which do you think is harder to be? A hemp operator, a multi-state hemp operator, or a multi-state marijuana operator? On the count of three, which is harder? 1, 2, 3. Hemp. Yeah. But it's so hard to be a cannabis operator, but at least we have some sort of framework. And I think that makes it easier when you go from state to state. That said, no one wants to operate within this rigid of a regulatory schematic.
And that's where the unity is. That's where the what makes you weak, what makes you strong, you put it together, you have a better system. Hemp was the tip of the spear. I would never deny them that. They blew the doors open of, hey, if you allow cannabinoids to run around, the sky doesn't fall. Are bad things happening that we need to address? 100%. But the sky hasn't fallen. People aren't falling down one way or the other. It's the nuance, right? And the only way the nuance gets handled if we come together and start that conversation. Because let's be clear, the oppositionists to cannabinoids may have their ire directed at marijuana today. That impediment gets removed. They don't all of a sudden forget that they don't like marijuana.
They're like, "Oh, we're good. We can take our vacay now." No, they just shift focus. That's right. So, okay, so let's talk about some of the nuances. And I think, I would assume that most people tuning in to watch this, have a base knowledge of what we're talking about. However, maybe we have some new friends joining us. And so, I think, well, we're lawyers, so like words matter. So let's just talk like jargon for a mere moment, because cannabis is actually just a botanical term that doesn't really have a legal distinction necessarily or legal significance. So, will you clarify, the key differences between marijuana and hemp, regarding their definitions, chemical compositions, and then the, broad strokes, the regulatory framework that each falls under?
So marijuana and hemp, cannabis sativa L is the genus, right? Regulatorily, Congress decided to stick their finger up in the air and say at a 0.3% of delta 9 THC on a dry weight basis, whatever that means without a definition, that is technically hemp. Now they said in that word salad of a definition of hemp, all extracts, all derivatives, all cannabinoids, all isomers, all salts of isomers, all acids, all.
Oh, yeah.
That is where we sort of start to get off the rails, right? Because let's look back inwards and say, what is a phytocannabinoid? A phytocannabinoid exists in the plant. You pull it out, it's delta 9 THC, you can extract it, you smoke it, it's in cultivar over cultivar, phytomaterials from the plant. Then we've got, and these are words that get thrown around a lot, right? People say synthetic cannabinoid or synthetic tetrahydrocannabinol. That is very clearly discussed within the schedule or the CSA.
Right.
And so that has a very specific meaning. Typically, it is a man-made product. It is synthetic. It has a cannabinoid agent. It acts like the delta 9 THC. And then there's this middle ground bucket. And that's really things that are semi-synthetic or chemically converted, we call them. That's where you start with base material of a phyto source, CBD, for example, the two primary cannabinoids that we know of in cannabis, besides the other like 100 of compounds that exist in there, are
Right.
THC and CBD. So if you take CBD and you use a catalyst, sometimes an acid catalyst, you can take that and turn it into other cannabinoids. Primarily what we see and what evolved in hemp is what we affectionately call THC's cousin, or delta 8. You can also take CBD and make CBN. CBN is highly desirable in both markets, right? I think you walk into a dispensary, you ask a bud tender, hey, I have trouble sleeping. What are they going to recommend to you? Some version of a CBN product. Midnight Blueberry for Kiva, something I personally enjoy.
My fave. It's
right?
a household fave, like for those 21 and up.
For those 21 and up, it is great to help you sleep. It has CBN. What most people would be surprised to learn, even in the regulated cannabis space, is that all CBN that is commercially viable is converted from CBD. It is a more stable conversion, doesn't have any chirality to it, term of art, that generally means if you look at your hands, they look the same, but they have some differences. A chiral form of a drug just means like a hydrogen's pointing the other way. That can have very significant impacts. It can actually turn something that is benign and safe into something that is harmful. That's the process where if you're using an acid catalyst to change CBD to delta 8, let's say, you want to make sure that that's safe on the end. That in the regulated space, we test final form products. So every product that you get in a consumer is tested before it gets to market. Now, we won't talk about that in this panel, but I'm sure you will, or in this webinar, but I'm sure you'll talk about it with others. Testing, even if you have a recall means that your testing standards are working. Everybody still eats lettuce, even though we've had many lettuce recalls over the years. So that kind of gives you phyto, semi-synthetic, synthetic, and then you have things called new and novel cannabinoids. For all the lawyers and you and I, THC-JD is my favorite one, but it is a new and novel cannabinoid, meaning that it does not exist phyto in the plant. And we see those proliferate more on the hemp side than we do in the cannabis side because we have the closed loop system. There's a lot more regulation on this side. So that to me is some of the more important nomenclature that you're going to want to be familiar with as we get into the weeds of it all around hemp and cannabis.
I love it. Okay, so thank you for that. And I think to sort of also frame up the rest of the conversation, it's important that the viewers or the listeners, understand with some nuance what exactly the 2018 Farm Bill did and didn't do, because I sort of feel like and it cuts both ways, so for better and or worse, that it was the like proverbial "we give an inch, you take a mile," and you know that is there's a benefit to that, right? Risk takers and business and whatnot, but there was so much excitement around it. I mean, I feel like again back in 2018 and 2019, if memory serves, like I did a several different presentations titled like Hemp Hooray, and it was sort of like all the exciting things. Then I was like, okay, but wait, hold on. Here's what this isn't doing, and here's where you need to really be careful. So, the Farm Bill legalized hemp and its derivatives. It did not provide any sort of clear regulatory framework for CBD products or ingestible products. And then that obviously has led to massive inconsistencies in labeling and quality and safety standards, which is, obviously critical. So let's just do like a quick and dirty 2018 Farm Bill. What did it do? What didn't it do? And then in particular, I think just a little focus on interstate commerce, because that was sort of like the biggest thing that I would remember speaking about and looking at under the Farm Bill.
I think it's always important to contextualize what the Farm Bill is, right? The Farm Bill is a large omnibus package that dictates everything from farming subsidies to food stamps. It is what we proverbially like to consider within the farm gate, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the Farm Bill, hemp is like a teeny tiny footnote in the Farm
Yeah,
Bill. It is not like, for our purposes, it's this big, huge thing. When you look at this 300 pages of text, it's like maybe 2.5, 3 pages.
I know.
So like,
Industry hath been born.
right? Yeah, a whole industry spawned up from it. But what really the Farm Bill was supposed to do was CBD was like kind of an offset. It was more, and this is why Mitch McConnell is the father of the Farm Bill, to give back to tobacco farmers that had fallowing fields the ability to plant industrial hemp. Remember, during the time of the Farm Bill, the slogan was rope, not dope. Right.
Yeah.
That's why we were putting products in. It was about textiles. It was about Dr. Bronner's, making sure that before the Farm Bill from 1970 to the Farm Bill, anything from cannabis sativa L was arguably a Schedule I substance.
Yeah.
Like it was that's where it was. So the Farm Bill was a big, meaningful moment to ensure that these textiles and things that are of non-cannabinoid nature had a pathway, and that you could cultivate and you could grow and you could take these fallowing tobacco fields and put value back into them. That has transformed over the years to be of a cannabinoid nature, but it was really around CBD, and it's rope, not dope. Don't be afraid. Like, let's get that conversation going. So I think that's a really important mindset to understand the environment that led from the 2014 pilot program of hemp to the 2018 Farm Bill to where we are now. When you look backwards, it really has evolved, and it wasn't about selling. It was about this fact that there was a de minimis point. Think about that, 0.3%.
Yeah, I've always wondered, like, where did that come from? Like, who made that decision? You probably know. But people ask me all the time, I'm like, I don't know, man. That's just the rule.
There was a lot of different conversations that came around. They looked at a lot of different reports, things coming out of the international marketplace, but it was about de minimis. Because when you talk about what's inside the farm gate, think about it. Flour's light and airy. It's going to be 0.3% every time. When you start to make that on an escalating weight basis, and you take that outside of the farm gate and into downstream manufactured products, that starts to be a little bit more nuanced, but you don't know what you don't know. And at the time that we were discussing this, nothing was about that number. It was creative and innovative lawyers and operators and scientists in the space. Now, that's nothing bad because it's going to push us forward, but let's just be respectful of what was happening during the time of the Farm Bill and what was the intention. So,
well, of course, I know like Dr. Bronner's, but I'm trying to think back. Did we see a lot of like consumer facing ingestible products at that time, at that point? I feel like maybe not certainly not compared to today, but like I do sort of remember reading it and being like, okay, great. And what next now? Like, how do you want us to do this? Thanks for the war. It's open to approval.
Right. And what most people don't talk about that I find the most compelling is attorneys general are generally some of the smartest lawyers, brains in our country, right? They go on to be senators and congressmen and governors and all these things, right?
In the hope that they're the smartest, not necessarily what they go on to do, but yeah.
Well, they've got good legal minds, whether how you use your legal mind.
True. Okay.
That's all relative to the person that is judging you, right? Yeah. I'm sure not everybody loves me, but that's fine too. So in 2019, there was this National Association of Attorneys General, NAGA, put out a letter to the FDA that said, we are very concerned that unscrupulous and hemp companies are going to use this language that was put out to make dangerous cannabis combinations and put them out into the market. And that letter, and happy to anybody wants to look at it, just type it into Google, NAGA 2019 hemp letter to the FDA, you'll see it. That sentence is paraphrased, is right in there. And they foreshadowed everything that was to come. So there were some people that did see this, but at the same time, it was really opportunistic. And in the Farm Bill, it directed USDA to promulgate regulations. You had to have a state plan. There was a lot of regulation paid for what the Farm Bill intention was, which was in the field, right? Farming, and in the name. And then there was also a call out that the FDA was involved and that nothing superseded, and this will become important later, the Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act or any states to regulate the production of hemp. So one of the other things that's in the Farm Bill that gets regulated or gets litigated a lot these days is around preemption. Now, what everybody at the 2018 Farm Bill did know was that our states are not exactly square. And sometimes you have to leave a state in order to take a freeway or a roadway to get back in the state. So as you're moving biomass around, they wanted to make sure that if one state adopted it and another state didn't, that you could still be able to have interstate commerce, to your earlier point, right? That is what that preemption language was. It was narrowly tailored preemption. It was not, oh, you have to do a state plan and you have to follow these rules. But, oh, by the way, state, you can't do anything after that. I'm going to preempt you from then not regulating. No, that's not what the Farm Bill said. It said, we're going to make sure that we understand states are perfectly aligned and you're going to have to maybe move this product around. So we're going to give you that license. But we're also going to say that you have a state, your time, place, and manner to give further regulation over their production. And when I read production, I think more like manufacturing. It's a much longer. Now, could the Farm Bill have been more clear? I would say yes. We've learned really important lessons. Words matter. But again, you don't know what you don't know. And I'm going to give COVID a big shout out here. You gave a lot of people.
Really never heard someone frame it that way. Big shout out. Special preach to my friend COVID. No, but keep going.
It is. They gave people a lot of time to sit and experiment in their homes and money and opportunity. And that nexus really bore the industry that we have today in a lot of ways, at least in my opinion.
I think that's right. Okay, so you sort of foreshadowed this a little bit in terms of like what what types of products were at the forefront of regulators' minds when they created or drafted the 2018 Farm Bill. And again, we're not really touching yet on hemp products as we know it today, that you can walk into like the Circle K or anywhere and get a drink or a lotion or a candy or whatever, pet products even. And so because it was built on this notion of products, again, that weren't necessarily intended for personal consumption, there's this like notion of hemp as non-intoxicating. And again, like when I think of hemp, if I'm like thinking to like sixth grade social studies, sure, yeah, like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, paper, even industrial applications, like, okay, yeah, fair. Fast forward to today, and the reality is that we have so many ingestible and consumable hemp products, and they often are intoxicating. And I think Delta 8 really is what, made that explode. And so, you've already sort of taken us through that high level understanding of the spectrum of cannabinoids, but let's talk about this idea of the public message, I think, which is what allowed hemp products to gain so much traction in the marketplace, is that they weren't intoxicating. Mm-hmm. Now, here we are today, and I do think it is a public safety issue. Big fan of public safety, love it. I have 2 small kids, and I care very much about that. Even if I didn't have children, I would care about it. So let's talk about that. Let's chat. Let's riff on, this idea of hemp as intoxicating or non-intoxicating, and how do we regulate this? How do we handle public safety? How do we make I think about this a lot, like a truthful shift in the messaging that we're getting without causing hysteria, a la reefer madness. Like, I don't want that to happen again, but I see that it is. And I have a lot of concerns.
Yeah, I think this is where both sides need to be a little bit more honest, right? When there was the tagline of rope, not dope, that innately made people feel comfortable. I have been in hearings in Arizona where a senator said to me, Miss Epstein, there's no way that the federal government would let people get high without knowing it. That consuming hemp or thinking that you were going to get high off of hemp is like drinking O'Doul's and thinking you're going to get drunk. And I said, in that moment, I said, look, all due respect, that's not the case. And we iterate and we learn. So I don't think that was the federal government's intention, but that decisions made, consequences had, right? So when people put out products and say Farm Bill compliant, as if that means that somehow it's not intoxicating, that's disingenuous and gives a bad look to everybody. There's also this idea of THCA flower, which I'm not sure how aware everybody is, going back a little bit to nomenclature. THCA is the precursor molecule to Delta-9 THC. So when you go to a dispensary and you look at those percentages on the jar of how much THC is in there, that is THC Delta-9 plus THCA added together and put on the front of the package. Why? Because the second you apply heat, and you're not going to eat flour, you're either going to apply pressure and turn it into canna butter, right, or you're going to apply heat and smoke it. Right. And so that's why we do that. That's also why the USDA, when it promulgated its rules, looked at the industry, borrowed that standard and said, we're going to add those 2 things together. And for me, as a hemp farmer in the field, I have to test total THC, adding those 2 numbers together. Now, what has happened is, again, some crafty lawyers say that the Farm Bill compliance stops at the field. So once you harvest it, that's compliance testing. Now I can break a COA. There's no track and trace mandated like there is in cannabis. Right. So you'll just run a new COA. And if you were to take any dispensary grade flower off the shelf, run a new COA and tell the lab not to add those together, you will see higher amounts of THCA than Delta-9. So when you put that out there and you say it's Farm Bill compliant and it doesn't have that much THC in it, It's got more THCA, which is non-psychoactive when it is stable, right? A THCA tincture or a tablet that isn't exposed to heat or pressure, heart, like significant pressure,
Right.
won't be intoxicating. It's not psychoactive. So that's really an example of where the truth and integrity is being degraded, and you lose the support of the regulators or a willing Congress when all of a sudden the wrong person, right? We're playing chicken with a public health crisis here, where the wrong person's going to consume this product, get into a car, not understand that it's intoxicating. There's nothing wrong with intoxicating substances. Like, let's be fair. I'm a big fan.
Love it. Look, we shouldn't be so afraid to have the conversation of what it is, because I don't understand how do we get to that place of public safety, that place of, you know, proper regulation, understanding what we're consuming. I mean, again, it's always about the kids, but it's also about us as individuals, as consumers. I want to know what I'm putting in my body. I want to make an educated choice. So I wish that we would stop. And maybe, you know, you're so in it every day, but I feel like there's still this like fear around having a truthful conversation. But again, how do you get to the finish line of proper regulations if you're not acknowledging what you actually need to regulate?
Right. You have to say what you're selling. You're selling an intoxicant. This idea that we're kind of borrowing language, right? Like hemp cannabinoids. Sometimes you hear people say hemp cannabinoids and, oh, that's marijuana. I could say marijuana cannabinoids. It's redundant. Cannabinoids are what are in the plant. To me, it's an opportunity for cognitive dissonance to drive policy, right? Like, it's a hemp cannabinoid. Okay, state Tennessee, you have an express prohibition on marijuana, but you have a hemp cannabinoid program that is arguably marijuana. But if that's what it takes to get people comfortable because of the prior stigma of marijuana, then let's at least be indulgent on both sides. They're marijuana cannabinoids, they're hemp cannabinoids. Okay, now we're regulating cannabinoids because it's not marijuana or hemp that consumers want. It's cannabinoids and various different versions of cannabinoids. So to your point, it's not just about youth, but youth when you don't have the respect of the honest conversation and there's not any marketing or advertising restrictions. That is a problem in and of itself. It's also a problem with uninformed and misinformed consumers, because you lose somebody if all of a sudden, I think we've all been in this situation. Somebody gave me a hemp gummy one time called the CBD, and I was up in a room at a conference and I couldn't come down. And that's happened to other people I know, but because you don't know. And if you're not able to make a responsible decision, now that didn't turn me away or friends of mine that have been in that situation away from cannabis. It was like a funny thing that you laugh about with your friends. But to a new consumer, and that's who hemp is targeting. Let's be very fair.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who is doing what? Cannabis connoisseurs, people that have been consuming the plant for years, right? I love it. I'm a flower girl. I love cannabis. Like, all of my passion comes from a place of cannabis in my life gave me a career. It took care of a lot of the impacts of my migraines. Like, I am a huge medical cannabis advocate. I've been consuming cannabis for years, more than half my life at this point, right? Hemp is they're the pioneer to the new consumer. It is almost more important for them to be responsible with what you are about to consume will get you high, not in like a kitschy, you're going to have an out of this world experience, our super potent products. It's almost more important for them to be of the low dose mindset versus the high intensity cannabinoids. And certainly the difference between a phytocannabinoid and an uber synthetic that could, and remember, everybody's body is different. So yes, THCP is one that's out there. THCP could be 33 times stronger in its binding affinity to your cannabinoid receptor.
Wow.
Simply because it could means that it needs tighter regulation. Because you're toying with that potential for harm. And whereas the harm currently is being attributed to marijuana, doesn't mean it's not going to catch up. I don't want to see Reefer Madness 2.0, and I want everybody to be able to play in these markets. We have to, though, even if you are not required to do something, you need to be thinking about the safety and the awareness and how you are conveying this information to new consumers who don't have to go to a dispensary and actually have a conversation before they get these products delivered to their doorstep.
And I think, so do you think we kind of already, I feel like we are starting to see a little bit of that reefer madness. I think there's like 20 plus states that have either complete bans or like regulations that are so restrictive it may as well be. And what we do know about the marijuana industry, and I think we can see it's happening now, is that like the cat's already out of the bag. You're not going to get it back in. And so you can ban the regulated market. Sure. You can ban the regulated market, but it's still going to be there. And I think that's evident because you can walk into literally any gas station or little mini mart and get hemp products. Again, you don't necessarily know what they are. And then you think about, again, like the regulations for marijuana in California are like, I can't even, the camera doesn't allow enough. And then you look up until, call it a few weeks ago, you look over at the regulations for hemp products and they are 0. And so it's just wild. It's like, we're caught between a rock and a hard place because like we want to have this honest conversation. We want it to be regulated, but then you have these 20 states that are banning it. That seems to be the trend. Can you solve this problem for us, Pam?
Can I solve it? I think what we can do is look to the reigning king of intoxicants, our friends over at alcohol, who ended their prohibition right now, 90 years ago. We're coming up on the century mark, right? 1933. There was this seminal work that I think every single cannabis lawyer or anybody interested in the ending of prohibition should read. It's called Toward Liquor Control. And it was an economic analysis that was requested by J.D. Rockefeller. J.D. Rockefeller himself was a teetotaler, thought alcohol made the greatest of minds sick, right? That was his position. But he also saw that Americans wanted it, and it was a business opportunity, and it was a public health and safety issue. Yeah. And so on the first page of this not very long book, it says nationwide prohibition has been pronounced a failure. Truer words could not be spoken about cannabis. And at the end of that book, it concludes that the only way to destabilize a well-entrenched, corrupt bootlegger and moonshiner culture was to set licensing fees and taxes purposefully low to effectuate social change and wide adoption. Do you know that unlike tobacco, alcohol actually has the least amount of counterfeit and illicit market activity? Why? Because alcohol is universally allowed and it's got gradation within it. And there's all this different regulation, so you can figure out how you fall into place there. There's not a lot of prohibitions on alcohol. Even ethanol is allowed, or Everclear. Now, you don't see Everclear out there, right?
Florida State University.
Right. But these are all really important lessons that we need to learn. One of the other things that a good friend of mine, and also a great hemp lawyer, cannabis lawyer in her own right, Sean Hauser over at VS, introduced me to was this wonderful woman called Pauline Sabin, who helped to usher in the end of prohibition. Unwritten women of history, right? They don't ever get the play they deserve. But she kind of helped recorrect the record. Like American mothers wanted to have regulation. Why? Because speakeasies didn't check IDs. They didn't care who was coming in. It was $1 for, it was $1 in, was $1 in, right? They didn't have a permit that they were going to potentially lose. So what was the better alternative? Sensible regulation. And I think that that's really the pathway, the salvation to the cannabinoid era, to having everybody want to play nice in that sandbox, is what is sensible. We know what's not sensible, because what cannabis has to go through is that's like survival of the fittest, right? You're like bruised and bloody and trying to like claw your way into mediocre,
a lot of the days.
right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. It ages you.
more money is outlaying on permitting than you can to come in. What other business in the world costs millions of dollars to transact before you can make a dollar? Oh, and by the way, you have in the teens debt and you're not allowed to have a bank and you
No
can't do
banking for
traditional
you.
banking.
No, yep, no. Well, and that's why I think so many people also just said like, fuck it. Like
I'm
let's
going to go to
pivot to hemp. It's like the state registration process is much easier. And you know, get thee to farm in. Like it's just
That's
yeah.
where your bounds are, right?
Wild.
So sensibility is
Yeah.
here. You have unfettered rogue regulation because they'll never say that they're illicit. When you have a legal, arguable right,
Mhm.
right? Where
Yeah.
we get into the weeds of are you really allowed to make a derivative of a derivative of a derivative of a derivative in a synthetic tetrahydrocannabinol, which is on the schedule. That's where the lawyers are going to get a
And then
little nuanced.
throw it on shelves.
But I would say that you have a right. You're not an illicit market actor. We both have problems with true illicit counterfeit products,
Yep.
but an unfettered rogue marketplace also is problematic. So if we start to get and we take from one what works, access, affordability, ease of operation, all of those things from hemp, so important. Thank you for showing us that that is possible, right? Thank you for being the pioneers on that side. But don't forget that you exist because marijuana was in the trenches and went through this arduous process, and they deserve to exist as well. And so you have to look at the country as many examples of how we're going to get to the middle, because you can't do in California that which you can do in Minnesota or Tennessee because the same people haven't paid in. So that's when you start to have these hard-hitting conflicts, is when you think that you're right over here where there was nothing and you built a system is the same rights that you should have in California when other people have given blood, sweat, and tears into something that really does need to be recalibrated.
Yes.
So that's sort of my, like, when public health is your square, all the things that you want to put in to fill up that, like, I guess I'm going to change the analogy. If that's your bucket, right? Your sieve is what is public health and safety. What components do you want to put in there? And right now, it's really imperative. It's a critical imperative for hemp to say, I'm going to self-regulate. And what does that mean? And it does mean that some things aren't going to be allowed.
So
that was like a really long-winded answer about how you get to a
I was going to say, I don't even remember what the question was originally, but it does not really matter.
We got kind of, but it all comes together.
So the non-intoxicating, like how do we do this? No, but it is important. Okay. So I do want to sort of talk about, shift gears like for a little bit, talk about terpenes, but because we are having this conversation in this moment in the context of public health and safety, I don't think you have your pin on today, but no pressure. Now I called you out, but let's
everybody see my back for a second. I'll go it for you.
No, we'll just keep going. You know, Pam can often be seen wearing what exactly her TICC pin. So what, you know, and you taught me about that again by way of your pin. So it's doing its job. And again, you know, I just want to mention this. We don't need to spend a super long time talking about it, but I do think it's something that you've championed for sure. It needs to be mentioned, and I don't think a ton of people, even if you're in the space, necessarily know what it is. So tell me, what is TICC? Why does it matter?
I'm going to give you the good 30-second overview, and thank you for reminding me of it. TICC is tick. So eventually I want everybody to know what's your tick number. It's the AVB of weed, right? When you look at an alcohol bottle, the higher that percentage is, the more you know that it could potentially affect you. Same thing. It stands for total intoxicating cannabinoid content. And so it would just take into effect right now. We can safely say that the only cannabinoid that everybody agrees is non-psychoactive, not non-harmful, but non-psychoactive, is CBD. So it would just accumulate all the other cannabinoids and give you a raw form number so that a consumer would know, hey, it uses that ISO symbol for products containing intoxicating cannabinoids. So it's a triangle, it's yellow, it's what everybody says is warning, right? So you would know, hey, a product I'm about to consume has something in it. It's a marijuana leaf. It's most people know what that means. And then it would have a number ascribed to it per serving, per package. And that's all that it would be. So you could be like, hey, what's your tick number? Mine is I like to have around 10 to 15, depending on what cannabinoids are in there. And that's my normal dose, or mine is 2.5. And so it would be able to have a conversation, and it would give people both awareness and the ability to make decisions based off of their own life experience, right? Over time, how much alcohol you consume is iterative. Same will be said for cannabis. So that's my like quick elevator pitch on tick. Go around and ask your friend what's your tick number, and then be able to have that conversation. That's sort of the spark the conversation that we want to have around.
That should be part of like a nationwide standard that is, that every state. I think so too. I think it makes sense.
And it would pivot all of our universal symbols, which are not universal at all. It would give the flex. So if you were going to go into interstate commerce with your product, my hope, my heart of heart hope, would be that you could use this symbol instead of your state symbol as we start to adopt a more holistic exercise. Hemp has the ability to do that from the ground up because they have the luxury of building out some of these programs state by state. Cannabis, that'll have to be kind of onboarded slowly as that moves forward.
Okay. I love it. What's your tick? You can have like a find out your tick party. Oh my God, you can do like a tick speed dating. I've got a lot of ideas here.
So many. I love your ideas. We're going to have to get you a pin.
Okay. So I do want to switch gears. And I mean, Pam and I already decided, the viewers, like we'll do another one in a few months, because there's so much to talk about, and
the world will change by then.
Well, yeah, I mean, there'll be so much more to talk about. But so for today, let's talk a little bit about terpenes and what we are starting to see in terms of flavor bans. I know that is a very hot topic, especially amongst the moms, the neighborhood moms. As I roll down to pick up in my I tip my bartender t-shirt.
For that.
What you gonna
Normalizing it for the moms out there, right?
Right. We'll see if they invite me to any PTA meetings.
You would be the coolest person at the PTA meeting. So flavor, right?
Terpenes, flavor. Let's hash it out. No pun intended.
I'm going to give the audience viewers their favorite fun fact of trivia for the day. The highest concentration of terpenes on earth exists in the cannabis plant. It is a highly diverse aromatic. So all of that sensory experience you get, think about cannabinoids as the accelerator. How much THC or how much cannabinoids in the product is how high you're going to get. That experience, what type of high you have. Is it uplifting? Is it sedative? Is it creative? All of that is the terpene profile that's in there. They're like the rudders. They're helping like the steering wheel there, right? They're so exciting, and they're so important. So we want to have a close to the flower experience. That's flavor. So the use of flavor is different than how you package and advertise that flavor, right? Like there's also a difference in are you using native inputs? Are you sourcing terpenes directly from the cannabis sativa L? The reason why we got into terpenes in the first place is because through the extraction process, distillate is generally odorless, colorless, tasteless. You can have high terpene extraction oil, right? You can have fresh rosin, all of that, but that's typically harder to scale, right? You've got distillate that goes into vape pen. If you want to add flavoring back in, which also helps with viscosity, other things, if you're putting it from the cannabis sativa L source, then you have an all cannabis product, right? Great. I want to know if I'm consuming that. Then you can source some of the same terpenes. Linalool, for example, is the primary component in lavender. Lavender smells the way that it smells because of linalool, not because of lavender. Or limonene and limonene are found in citrus. Same things, right? When we name something lemon crush or lemon OG, it has a reminiscent of lemons. That's because they share the same terpenes. So if we want to have a true to the flower experience, we can do that with native inputs, terpene bulb. You can do that with natural inputs, which is taking it from other natural botanical sources and mimicking that product. Also something that you would want to know, right? Am I consuming an all natural product, a cannabis product, or you can have synthetic terpenes. Now, some states like California don't allow those. Other states do. But again, that's a labeling exercise. And so you can then say, I want your cannabis to taste like cannabis, and I don't want it to be too punched up, right? You don't want something that tastes like you're biting into candy. These are all aspects of regulation that don't need to lead to prohibition. Tobacco has a lot of flavor restriction and flavor bans because tobacco is naturally devoid of terpenes. It's bitter. It doesn't taste good. Cannabis already does. And so we're already different. What we don't want to do is have flavor bans like we did from that emanated in San Francisco around tobacco. Because what is on the other side of prohibition? An illicit marketplace. What do we know from all that we have lived through from the 1970s till now? That an illicit market services a desire. So if there's a desire for products out there, let's at least regulate it sensibly, and let's start removing what the real issue is, because we buy things first with our eyes, right? If a product, Joe Camel, let's try to avoid Joe Camel. Let's not anthropomorphize a lemon. The lemon doesn't have to have arms and legs, but you know what we do have to do, because we don't have 100% literacy rate or 100% English speaking rate in this country, is to use visuals and colors. Some people may be allergic to something. We should be able to convey that messaging in a responsible way. We don't have to prohibit flavor. We have to, again, take a sensible lens to that. And those are two different things, how something is marketed versus the addition of flavor. And so that's something that we at Terpene Belt, and also from a vaporized product perspective, a little nod out to Vape Safer, an organization that I work with about sensible flavor rhetoric and also sensible sensible vaping.
So what are some of these flavor bans? Like what pick a few states that have the most, restrictive flavor bans out there. They're all over it's flying everywhere.
There are a lot of places. I think sometimes they try to get at it by saying no synthetics. I think we've seen that in Michigan. We've seen that in California. Florida tried to do the presence of flavor equals attractiveness to children. We fortunately got that language pulled out of the legislation, even though the veto happened, and that was happening in hemp. So remember, this is also where hemp and cannabis is like a volley. If you saw that bill pass with that language in it, the addition of any flavor, doesn't matter where it comes from, cannabis, natural or synthetic, the simple addition of how that language was drafted meant it was attractive to children. How damaging would that have been? And it was coming from hemp to cannabis. So you really have to pay attention to what's happening on both sides of that conversation. So I think that education here, showing up with how you want to be regulated, being responsible with packaging, advertising, things like that are going to make the flavor conversation easier, because I don't want it to go away. Nobody wants to smoke an odorless, flavorless vape.
No.
And you don't want to have candy that tastes like nothing, right? This is about the secondary piece of that, which is how that product looks to who's going to want to consume it.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about that lemon with the arms again for a minute. Started dancing in my
right? Because look, we're adults. I love things. You love what you loved when you were a kid. I get it. You liked Kool-Aid as a kid. You'll like a Kool-Aid flavor thing as an adult. But we have to build trust with the regulator. You have to meet the regulator where they are, earn it, Like, don't say that I'm prohibited, but lead them on breadcrumbs to a place of trusted safety. You'll get more. So instead of getting nothing, it's creating a system that we can live and breathe with and expand as we earn that right. Because on the other side of an unfettered allowance is an overly restrictive world.
Truth. All right. Okay. Again, I feel like truly we could talk for a millennia. Let's but I do sort of want to like, okay, so take the lens back out a little bit. Election season is upon us. Who is elected matters, control for House and Senate very much matters. So I want to do like a little current events section. So we had the 2018 Farm Bill. We gonna get a 2025 Farm Bill?
Well, the Farm Bill is supposed to be reauthorized every 5 years. It's kind of funny we haven't done it yet. I think we'll see some movement in the Farm Bill. When, I don't know. That really depends on the makeup of the election. Do the House and the Senate flip? Who is the sitting president? Do they do something in lame duck? That's not out of the question. It's not probable if I'm looking in my crystal ball. They'll probably do an extension. We have a dairy cliff coming up. I love cheese. I don't want dairy products to go up 8x overnight. So the extension of the last
family
Farm
would starve. We would just starve.
Girl dinner. I'd have nothing to eat.
Children also eat a lot of cheese
and a lot of dairy.
So much. Yeah, let's not do again.
So 9/30, right? The Farm Bill extension expired. It didn't mean that the Farm Bill wasn't in effect. It means the authorizing, appropriating subsidies will expire at the end of the year. So they can do another extension, which kicks the Farm Bill out for another 12 months. Okay. Anytime within that, depending on what happens between the House and the Senate, the Farm Bill originates in the House and then goes over to the Senate, and then there's conference. Right? I always think about that little bill becomes a law, that video when we were little. I'm like, what is the bill? Go to Capitol Hill. Anyway, it's like a lot of nerdy stuff happens up in my brain. So you may, if the House loses and you have a new House of Origin, you may have a whole new Farm Bill for things that have to do with food subsidies, SNAP programs, things that have nothing to do with hemp. Right. But that could start the process all over again if there's a united Congress. So there's a lot of unknowns there. What we do know is the issue is reaching a fever pitch such that it may not just be dealt with in the Farm Bill. You could see other germane committees of jurisdiction taking this up in different ways. We saw the Wyden bill released, right? You could see something come out of ENC. Energy and Commerce. They just had a subcommittee meeting, a health subcommittee meeting last month on tobacco and food programs, where all of a sudden there were detours to talk about marijuana. So like the issue is at the top of mind a little bit. I mean, not in the grander scheme of things, but still offices know about it. And it's becoming a catalyst. So I don't know what's going to happen in the Farm Bill. I do know that in the 119th Congress, we will see more bills that touch some iteration of hemp or marijuana than we have in past years by probably an order of magnitude.
I mean, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Not exciting, however, is, and I'm going to take us somewhat current May. I mean, it feels like it wasn't that long ago. Can you, I want to talk about the Miller Amendment. I feel like it did not get a lot of airplay. I'm not sure how, like maybe it did. Maybe I had my head somewhere else, but like, I feel like it should have warning, like this is problematic. So would you share with us a little bit about the Miller Amendment? And then I think, we can chat briefly about CSRA, but I also want to talk about like what the F is happening in California as well. And I think the Miller Amendment is a nice tie into that. So let's chat about those things in our remaining time.
Mary Miller Amendment. Okay.
Miller. Ms. Miller.
The Mary Miller Amendment is now part of what we call the House version of the Farm Bill. So it's fully integrated. It came out of this, again, to your earlier point, if you don't show up to be regulated, this is a catalytic moment, right? It really should have been a wake-up call to everybody that this was not the intention. Now, do I think that it is a prohibitionist approach? Yes. Do I think that it could be,
like, for people who might not be aware, like, what did it, I mean, I could say it, you could say it, but what did this amendment do?
It effectively like redefined industrial hemp so that you have a hemp cannabinoid product which cannot contain any detectable levels of THC in it if it's a hemp product. So effectively, it would have really decimated to a large degree the intoxicating hemp marketplace. And it would have had some effect on CBD products that contain any amount of THC in them.
Like any amount, right? Like it throws away this 0.3, which was sort of.
Well, no, not in the field.
Okay.
So that was a little bit of hyperbole. It wasn't in the field. It gave you a definition of a hemp product and it said you can't have any of these things and you can't synthesize outside of the plant. So it took away Delta 8. It was very limiting. We don't have a lot of time, but I would go through what each one of those things are. If we want to do a little mini statement somewhere else, I'm happy to. Anybody wants to talk about the devil in the details of the Miller Amendment, but overall, it would have significantly changed the landscape and really brought us back to that, what some would argue is the original intention of the Farm Bill, to not have intoxicating products running around under the guise of hemp. Now, there are middle ground opportunities. This is a real good opportunity to come in and say, all right, I hear you, Congress, but you've already done something. Let's use this as a catalyst for responsible regulation, sensible regulation, and find a more middle ground. I think I was surprised it went en banc, which means that it didn't have a separate hearing and it just went with a bunch of other amendments into the bill. I think that was a surprise for a lot of people. But it just shows
people weren't quite as like in tune to it.
Yeah. It shows where the I committee was. Now, we didn't have a floor vote. We don't know what's in the Senate side. I do anticipate seeing a Senate markup possibly this month released. So we'll see what the temperament is on that side of the line and where these two things coalesce and come together. The CRSA, the Wyden bill, really riffs off of that to address and provide a framework. Now that's a bill that has a $30 million price tag with no taxation or user fee to appropriate how that money is going to come to bear. So I don't see it really going anywhere in this Congress. It will clearly be reintroduced. But those things.
But I feel like it's starting the Wyden bill, the CSR, it starts to get us where we need to be. And like, again, obviously we're attorneys, so we're not having people call us who are like, hey, I don't want to follow the regulations. Like our circle, that the company that we keep obviously is mindful of that. But I just feel like the hemp operators I know want clarity. They are very pro public safety. They want more guidance on, how we're going to test raw materials and finished product and labeling that's accurate. And they're not even largely against, age restrictions either. And so I think, one, that's amazing, but we don't hear that enough. Like the general public doesn't hear that enough. And it sort of but it scares me a little because it does remind me again of like my super, super early years in the cannabis space, which I started in 09. And it was like, we want regulations. Like, tell us what to do. So how we can be good actors. Like we want that. And then, fast forward and do we have regulations? But I do think CSRA, for me at least, is the most promising thing I've seen in some time. And at least it starts to get us there. And so keep an eye on that, viewers. And then
the word cannabinoid for the first time. So it is really an exciting thing. And I would say you're right. There are a great many good hemp operators. It's show up with the regulation that you want, not with your hat in hand and say, I am willing to be regulated. It is something I think that we should learn from the regulated industry. We said tax me and regulate me. We didn't mean it. We meant provide like a sensible pathway so that we can have a business, not bleed me dry before I can have a business. So
I feel like I did this like 100 times today. I'm like, that's my general end of year sentiment. Like,
be the change you want to see, right? Like, don't just show up and say, I'm willing to be regulated. Show up with, here is the self-regulation that we have done that works. And I've adopted into it. I would love it. Hey, any hemp operators out there, put tick on your package, right? Like, show up and say, I don't need you to over-regulate me. We've already done the work. Here is the structure. There are parts of the CRSA that need to be refined.
Of course.
Show up with that, and not with words, but with actions.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of hemp companies that are doing that today. And the more people that adopt in to that, the better off we will all be. Because look, I think what we know to be true from all of this experiment on both sides is the regulators need to understand from the regulated or the to be regulated what is sensible.
Buy-in is
don't know.
So critical. It's so. I mean, on the California marijuana side, I was saying when I was chatting with Karen Woodson previously, I was like, you know, wouldn't you love to see some stakeholder meetings again where they come in and say like, hey, how's it going for you guys? Because in the beginning in 2018, I thought the then BCC did such a great job of that. I felt like we felt heard. I mean, we certainly didn't get everything we wanted, but there was a level of engagement that I was very pleasantly surprised by. But so let's talk. I know you have to run in a few minutes, and of course, I still have like 30 questions on my notes, but we can do a part two. But I do want to talk just for a minute about what the hell is happening in California, because when I watched Governor Newsom's little press conference, literally I said out loud, what do you mean you just became aware of this? Pam's been screaming about this for years. Like, it was as if, the way he was speaking was like, as if this was like an issue that was just recently brought to his attention and now he's going to act. And I'm like, but I know my girl been hollering at your office for a long time about this. So, what do you think? And now we're already starting to see lawsuits coming out. So like just talk. I mean, you can't have a conversation about a regulated marketplace without talking about California. You just can't do it.
Yeah. I think, look, it's so true that regulators show up not late, but informed, because you can't just jump to a conclusion. Yeah, no, I've been screaming about this forever. But validation is important. If a regulator acts just because one canary in the coal mine human says that this is what's going to happen, they need more. And so I think that when he says that, he means it's a critical mass, and also that it came right to his doorstep, right? Like his kids were having this interaction. It's so permeated. And that's really where the rubber hits the road, right? When that AB 45 was passed, they specifically said over time,
2021 or passed in 2020, and then it was enacted in 20. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, 21 to
a couple years ago.
So not that long ago.
Yeah.
But when it was passed, they knew it had to be iterative, because you didn't know what the loopholes were, and we didn't know what we didn't know even then, right? Like, we were trying to get our arms around an issue and allow CBD products to get to market. Because remember, you could go and get CBD like at the juice bar or in the spot, the nail place, and it just wasn't allowed. We had that really bad CDPH FAQ. And so we were really trying to address something proactive and positive there. And they knew they knew they would have to iterate. And that's what this is. And look, would everybody have loved it to be sooner? Sure. Shoulda, coulda, woulda, a lot of things.
Well, and for it to actually regulate, again, it just sort of puts this like blanket ban. And I think, again, it's too late. Like, it's out there. What's enforcement even going to look like? of this.
I mean, since it went into effect, I think, what is the number that the Politico article said? ABC went into 383 retailers that were selling hemp over the weekend and seized 700 products. It's happening.
But
You've
that's not,
got
it's not a permanent solution.
it's not a permanent solution, but this is the catalyst, right? People don't come to the table because look, 22-23 actually allowed more than what's in the emergency regulations.
Yeah.
Let's not forget that bill that a lot of stakeholders, including some in hemp, opposed, actually allowed more THC in the product than non-detect. So this is you kill something, you might not like what's coming in behind it situation, but it should act as a catalyst to bring both sides together to ask the legislature to do something more palatable.
Yeah.
I want that level of access. I want patients that can't necessarily get the products that they need in the levels that they need it in because sick patients need more than 100 milligrams, right? Or these products aren't profitable, so they're not getting to market the same way. There's a lot of good that can come from both sides saying a united ask and saying, look, we want this to go for first. We know we have issues with Prop 64 and certain restrictions that we can't do. How do we do this artfully so that we start to design a better program? I think what you're though seeing is a reaction to an abuse of what the intention of 45 was. It's a microcosm of what's happening at the federal level. And one of the things that I don't think people forget is if you are a federally allowed product, marijuana is adulterated. That's why we have heavy regulation in the state. We act outside of the Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act because we're an adulterant. Hemp is not adulterated. And as a non-adulterated product, you are subject to all of the food and beverage regulation in this country. And that means the FDCA, the Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act. You are not supposed to put an active ingredient in food and beverages unless it is generally recognized as safe. There is no generally recognized as safe acceptability for THC. And there's been a lot of applications for CBD. They've all been denied. There's no new dietary ingredient status, which would allow you to be used in a dietary supplement. So this idea that you're a hemp skeleton key and you can just put these products out in general commerce without having those two things was a little bit of a, house, you're built on a house of cards. So to say that you have this unadulterated right and you're economically harmed and therefore we should stop the emergency regulations, to go all the way back to your original point of public health and safety, profit, public health and safety to a judge.
No. Of course, I agree. I just feel like, I don't know, in the time since AB 45 was enacted, surely we could have come up with something that wasn't basically a ban.
Right, but we didn't. Right. You had that opportunity. It was called 22-23 and coming to the table with solutions versus opposition.
Yep.
I'm hopeful, and I do believe that this will be the catalyst that brings hemp and cannabis to the table in California to come out with something better, a piece of legislation that works. Yeah. Look, I would love to lower our taxes because we have a wider tax base. If every intoxicating cannabinoid was taxed and we could reduce year over year, we could get to a sensible taxation plan because of the just amount of product that's transacting. So I don't love a prohibition. I don't think that it works. I'm hoping that it's more of a catalyst, and it's emergency rules, right? So they're not forever. If these industries could come together and spend their dollars and spend their time collaborating versus litigating, we would maybe have, that would be my hope. I think that's going to happen regardless. And the litigation is the litigation.
The litigation is already happening.
So on the go forward, let's not judge each other by our actions because we all do what's best for our companies. So I understand why that's going on. but let's take a forward-looking lens and actually, do the hard work, have the hard conversations. What should be sold outside of the regulated program? What is a fair and responsible tax? Is it parity at first so that everybody benefits? These are the things that are going to get people to collaborate versus coming in and saying, I want to pay 5% while everybody over here pays and is about to pay 19%. That's not, people aren't going to listen if that's where you start from. So if we can look at California for California, not for Minnesota or Tennessee, but like what is our reality here? I think we really can come to a good and honest and new era.
I hope so. So we'll come back in the new year. We'll talk more. We'll talk about like what regulation might look like in a rescheduled world. I mean, December 2nd is not that far away. So let's save that for the new year, a new year chat. I like to always try and end on like a high note. So what are your top 3 things that you feel like most excited for in 2025 in the new year for the hemp industry?
Hey, I can't believe it's 2025.
Yeah, that's
wild. Blows my mind.
Absolutely.
I'm excited that we're talking about cannabinoids. I think that's the catalyst for fundamental change. I am excited that the 119th is going to be inundated with all of this brain power around like, what does this mean for us? And I'm excited to have more actors in the conversation. I think the consumers want these products. I'm stoked for them to be fanning the flames of regulation. That's what it takes, right? It takes. I think somebody sent me the other day.
Echo chamber here, right? It's a lovely echo chamber. I love our chamber.
Love it. But we need to think broadly. I'm going to leave everybody with this high fact. Everybody go out and find. Somebody sent me over the weekend, a good friend and colleague of mine, Cars Against Humanity said synthetic marijuana you can buy at a gas station. Now, I'm not a huge proponent of synthetic anything, but or synthetic marijuana because I like marijuana, but that just shows you where the zeitgeist is. Right? Yes. Like if in a card game that adults are playing, that is a card, we are here. We have summited to the fact that people are talking about this and they're not afraid. That's not a card game that you play under the radar, right? Like that's a real thing that is a catalyst to conversation, and people aren't afraid to say the word cannabinoid. That's a huge opportunity. So I'm high on that and excited that we're entering into a new era where I don't have to call it hemp. I don't have to call it marijuana. I can be like, I enjoy my cannabinoid products and, my tick number is X. So
I want to find out what my tick number is, my personal tick number.
Right.
We can figure that out at MJ BizCon. That'll be our guess. Listen, Thomas Jefferson once said, hemp is one of the greatest, most important substances of our nation. And I think to Ms. Pamela's point, consumer demand continues to grow, and it is critical that we regulate cannabis and intoxicating cannabinoids, and that operators continue to work together collaboratively. We need sustainability. We need scalability. We have to continue to prioritize public health and safety. And with badasses like my friend Pamela at the forefront, I have no doubt that we will get there. Thank you so much for your time. You are a busy woman and you carved this out. I am so appreciative for the knowledge you share, the passion you share, your friendship, of course. And that's it. This is Kimberly Simms with Regulated Roots. We will see you next time.